Ladies and gentlemen, the 2017 MHCID Commencement Ceremony for the University of California is assembled. Please rise for the national anthem.
Good afternoon. I'm Marios Papaefthimiou, Dean of the Donald Brent School of Information and Computer Sciences at the University of California, Irvine. On behalf of the faculty of the school, welcome to the 2017 commencement ceremony for Master of Human-Computer Interaction and Design degree candidates. Joining me today on the platform are distinguished faculty and other participants in the ceremony. When I call your name, I would like you to stand and remain standing. Audience, please hold your applause until the end of the lineup. Professor Gillian Hayes, Faculty Director of the MHCID program. Professor Dawn Patterson, I cannot see from far away. Professor Melissa Masmanian, Professor Jesse Jackson, Dr. Wendy Kellogg, Professor Andre van der Hoek, Chair of the Informatics Department, our student speaker, Stacy Selnick, Professor Deborah Richardson, Emeritus, Professor Emerita Deborah Richardson, founding Dean of the Donald Brent School of Information and Computer Sciences, Professor Emerita Judy Olson, Professor Emeritus Gary Olson, and Dr. Darren Dannenberg. You know, you changed the order. I also wish to acknowledge the presence on the front row of other distinguished faculty and program staff. Will the faculty and staff please stand, and another round of applause for all these faculty and staff. Thank you. You may all be seated now. As we all know, the class of 2017 is special. Yes, it is the inaugural class of the MHCID program, but it's also a very diverse class. 64% of its members are women. It's an exceptional feat for a STEM program. The age span of the students is greater than 1 decade. 1/3 of the students come from outside Southern California. As with every new and ambitious start, no matter how well prepared one is, there is always some anxiety about the outcome. The MHCID program in particular is a rigorous professional program of the highest caliber that places significant demands on its students, most of whom are juggling jobs, career changes, and family obligations. Before the start of the program, a lot of work went into selecting students with the preparation and fortitude to succeed in such a demanding program. Once the program started, a lot of effort went into ensuring that these students do not only meet but exceed expectations, surrounded by mentors and faculty who guide them throughout the course. I'm proud to report that out of the 22 students who started the program last September, every one of them made it through and is graduating today. I want to congratulate all the graduating students for their hard-earned accomplishment. I also want to congratulate their parents, spouses, partners, children, and significant others for their support. Last but not least, I want to congratulate my colleagues and staff for their role in all this. Let's give a round of applause to everyone who contributed to the accomplishments we're celebrating today. Thank you. Professor Hayes, please come forward to introduce our student speaker.
Thank you, Dean Papafthimou. It is my pleasure to introduce our student speaker, Stacy Soronik. From the first day, Stacy has been a leader in our program. She regularly takes time to support others, share information she finds, and just be a friend. So it is no surprise that her peers elected her to speak on this auspicious occasion. Please join me in welcoming Stacy Soronik.
No pressure, guys. Thank you all for coming here and joining us today. I'd like to take this opportunity to share with all of you one of the greatest life lessons that I have ever learned, as was told to me by one of the wisest women I've ever known. My grandmother, who was born Doris Minette Gold, grew up in Dorchester, Massachusetts, which was and still is one of the most depressed and depressing neighborhoods in Boston. Her family was not starving, thanks to her father's cleverly hidden career, which his family thought was in the men's clothing and accessories business. He was actually involved in illegal gambling, which is the basis of the best love story I've ever been told, but that's a story for another day. As I said, her family was not destitute, but they were not well off. And when my great-grandfather passed away, rather suddenly, money became even tighter. So after high school and a knee injury, which robbed her of a career in her first passion, which was ballet, Grandma turned to her second biggest passion and talent, which was painting and drawing. She applied to the Massachusetts College of Art, which was and still is the only public institute in this country for tertiary art education, and was called in for an in-person portfolio review. Now, I'm going to pause for a second. How many of you people in this room have been through a portfolio review of any kind? So, it's the kind where you have to show the person who holds the golden ticket to your future in their hands as they peruse things that you created. If you haven't been through this, I can liken it perhaps to a face-to-face audit with the IRS. Needless to say, a portfolio review, especially your first one, is perhaps one of the most nerve-wracking experiences that anybody can go through, especially for a young Jewish woman who was the grandchild of German immigrants who grew up in the ghettos of Boston with no prior formal art training. My grandmother must have very much felt like little Dory Gold, as she called herself sometimes, when she was walking through the echoing halls of Mass Art in hopes of being accepted to the school. You see, Mass Art is a state school and has always been relatively inexpensive, especially for residents of the Commonwealth. But Grandma could not afford tuition, and federal financial aid didn't exist yet. So whether she knew that her only hope of getting in and going was to be accepted on a full scholarship or not, I'm not really sure. Based on how she told the story, it seems that this either hadn't occurred to her or she hadn't really given much thought to how it would make her feel if she were to be accepted on a full scholarship. Well, Grandma was an 18, 19, 20-year-old woman, and she apparently had far more pride than she even realized, because she was accepted, one of the very few that year, on a full scholarship, based on both merit and need. And because there was an element of need-based aid, the school's term for her acceptance status was special student. This term did not sit well with Doris. To her, it implied all the things that she was already very self-aware, self-conscious of, and she did not want to literally be called out as a special student in any way. She declined their offer and did not attend art school, though she continued to paint, eventually stopping when she had children after the war. That decision to not attend art school as a special student was the biggest regret of my grandmother's life. Though she never stated those words to me explicitly, she was talented, and while she would never admit to it, she knew it too. But pride reared its ugly head and would not allow her to accept such an amazing opportunity. This was her lesson to me. Don't be prideful, and don't ever think you're too good for anything or anyone, because something you may pass on may prove to be the biggest regret of your life, much later in life. And regret is the worst feeling in the world. I'm not talking about regretting eating that whole chocolate cake you ate last night. That's kind of an obvious no-brainer, not a bad idea if you think about it. But what I'm talking about are the decisions we make in life that maybe aren't so obvious. The decision to not do something, or not take action, or not stand up for what's right when you can. These are the choices that come back and haunt you years later, when you realize what might have been, if only you had done, said, or gone to X. That's not the point of the story, though, to freeze everybody in this room with a gripping sensation of what if, because that's really no more healthy and often turns into obsessive thoughts. But I digress. As you go out there, armed with a degree in designing interactions between humans and machines, realize that you have knowledge that can be put towards great good, the greatest good if you should so desire, but also for a great deal of capitalistic evil, such as addictive designs. Be inclusive, not exclusionary in your work, and by this I don't just mean to design inclusively, but think broadly and act broadly within your narrow sphere of locus. And while I guarantee nothing, I promise you will have a better chance of regretting nothing at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Wendy Kellogg. Wendy has had a storied career in human-computer interaction, launching some of the most important initiatives in our field. She has also consistently been a strong supporter of our proud university. So please join me in welcoming Wendy Kellogg.
Gotta find the right computer. Dean Papaethlemou, Director Hayes, distinguished faculty, advisors, mentors, proud parents, families, and friends, and most of all, most importantly, the inaugural graduating class of this unique program. Yay! I am so delighted to share this day of celebration with you. And although having perused some of your websites, I suspect you already have war stories of your own, I thought I would use some of my time today to tell some of my war stories, while, of course, imparting sage advice and encouragement to you. And we have a lot in common, actually, not least of which a collection between us of truly bizarre school mascots. For you, the anteater; for me, the banana slug and the bright green duck of the Oregon Ducks. See the back of my robes? No, don't fall over. So already I feel a bond. But more importantly, with the completion of this program today, you've stepped more fully into the HCI and design community. And what a wonderful community it is, one that I've been privileged to be a part of and call my professional home for over 30 years. I had the good fortune to join a brand new department in human-computer interaction at IBM in 1985 as I finished my PhD. The field was just beginning then. The precursor to the CHI conference was held in Gaithersburg, Maryland in 1983. So I attended my first HCI conferences with the founders of the field, people like Ben Schneiderman, Judy Olson, Gary Olson, Don Norman, Stu Card, my IBM colleagues Phyllis Reisner and John Thomas, and many others. I came from a background in cognitive psychology, and the idea of applying psychological principles to understand how people interact with technology was new. The idea was that if the technology were designed with the properties of the human operator in mind, it would be better suited to its purpose. Early approaches were very creative, but narrow in scope. For example, in 1981, Phyllis Reisner had the idea that user interfaces could be codified in a formal grammar that would enable comparison of different designs. The grammatical representation of an interface design could then be used to make predictions about usability and compared with empirical test results. This initial idea was followed by a large body of work in codifying interfaces and human characteristics in the hope of evaluating usability of designs before committing to the effort and expense of building them. And the approach kind of worked, had some successes, but as Jack Carroll and I argued in 1989, it was too limited. There was a lot missing. For example, early approaches were unable to model people, real people who made errors. Of course, there was no definitive way to go from the analysis to design. Of course, designers of all stripes have known forever that design is not deductive, whether from first principle, grammars, or other kinds of models. Design is nuanced, it's complex, and the myriad of details that must be reckoned with prevented this kind of approach from really offering a general solution. So in my early days in HCI, the field evolved from studying things like line editors, those were early text editors, and single user applications on mainframe terminals to single users of PCs, then the advent of the Macintosh in January of 1984, to groupware applications, and of course, eventually the internet. There were no formal education programs or degrees in HCI. In 1998, I founded the first social computing research group on the premise that software applications, even in a workplace context, would need to serve expressive needs like communication or even social interaction, as well as instrumental needs, in other words, what the work that needed to be doing. When I first told my boss that I wanted to call my group social computing, he said, "What does that mean? It sounds like a bunch of programmers sitting around drinking beer." Okay, that was harsh. But at that time, even instant messaging was not widespread. It was not known. So this idea barely existed. So the social computing group became a typical kind of early HCI project in an industrial research lab, in that we were both trying to discover what we were about. We had in our lab the Albert Einstein quote, "If we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be called research." And also explaining to others what it was and why we thought it was important. Every new research executive that came into IBM was lovingly and gently educated as to the topic of user friendliness, as they called it. It was not a finishing touch that you added on at the end of a project, nor a guide to color selection in interfaces, as an engineer with new HCI responsibilities once thought. And while these things are somewhat better today, I'm afraid that you all can expect to do a lot of the same throughout your careers. And of course, in the last 10 to 20 years, the entire field has evolved and exploded. We have HCI departments and iSchools, master's and PhD degrees. Digital technology has permeated all aspects of our work lives, but also our social, personal, financial, entertainment lives. New ways of working have evolved, like Mechanical Turk or Elance, Fiverr. We've seen the proliferation of personal mobile devices, the emergence of the Internet of Things, collectively produced digital resources like Wikipedia, speech interfaces, streaming everything. Well, suffice it to say that in 30 years of HCI, the technology has really always outpaced our ability to analyze, predict, or articulate design and social issues. But it's still fascinating area. Yet I fear that all of you will be facing tougher and more important challenges that current and future technologies raise. We are now seeing the proliferation of intelligent or cognitive computing, as IBM likes to call it, into every facet of life, from driverless cars to analytical and decision-making partnerships with people in every profession and creative domain. Some of the challenge comes from the fact that there are emergent phenomena in things like social media that no one anticipated. For example, the proliferation of fake news as a way of making money or influencing opinion. There are network effects, as studied by Kate Starbird, where websites citing other websites form the impression of consensus or truth, where in fact there is none. There is no doubt that misinformation and disinformation can spread quickly and powerfully. There are also risks that are hard for the average person to assess. I have an Amazon Echo in my home, and it's true that in order for it to recognize its name when I call on it to do something for me, it must in some sense be listening to the ambient environment. Many writers and now researchers are raising questions about this ability. Is this a potential threat to privacy, or could it become a mechanism for identity theft? I tend not to worry about this too much, and I don't doubt Amazon's intentions. They say they don't retain any of the data, yet it is streamed through the net to their web servers in order to do the speech recognition, not obvious to the users of the technology. We, the HCI and the design community, are the buffer between people and hidden and emergent properties of technology. It is not only our profession to understand users and design useful, usable, and even beautiful technological artifacts, but it is our obligation to understand better than anyone else the possible risks of the technologies we are designing and how to minimize them. Look at the recent fiasco with the data breach at Equifax. 143 million people with data potentially exposed to hackers. According to a Wired magazine article 2 days ago, it was entirely preventable. Equifax failed to update their Apache server with a patch that had been available for 2 months. Now, I'm not saying that HCI people at Equifax, if there are any, are responsible for making sure that their servers are updated with the latest patches as soon as they're available. But HCI does have a large research effort around usable security, and we should be aware of it and promoting its findings in our companies and projects. With everything online and the convenience of accessing everything online, the impact on people's lives and security is huge. If we, the people in technology, do not take up the cause of understanding and promoting safety, then who will? And after the fact, it's motivating for companies to try to fix things for the future, but it's already a disaster for people who have lost so much. Which brings me to my first recommendation to you, which is finding and using your voice. Most people are not sociopaths, particularly in work environments. They're actually trying to be friendly and helpful and get along. They profoundly are not trying to make each other uncomfortable, most people. But people outside our field, people who haven't had the benefit of learning what you have learned, important people in your company who have the power to make critical decisions and fund your work or not. These people can have some really wrong-headed ideas. We worked on a project once for a UK supermarket. They wanted to build a mobile program for a program they already had where customers would call in their orders to the store and the staff would pick their items and then they could pick it up. They wanted to put this on a Palm Pilot. For most of you, the Palm Pilot is a very early, small mobile device. Suffice it to say. We were asked to design and build the application. So we, of course, gathered some basic information, like how many items the store sold, And of course, it was thousands of things. So we came up with a very brilliant way of compressing all that data into the little tiny Palm Pilot, and the brainstorm of having a graphical interface for navigating all these items. That was good. But we knew that we probably should go talk to some of the customers using the existing system. Actually, we asked to talk to people who were using the existing call-in system, people who never used it, and people who started using it but quit. Well, wow. The resistance from the project manager was unexpected and intense. They didn't even want to ask our customer if we could go talk to their customers. Can't you just make a survey, they said? What exactly is it that you want to know? Anyway, maybe the staff can tell us. Some of my colleagues were willing to leave it at that, and they started writing a survey. Me, not so much. I wrote a long email explaining why it was crucial to talk to these customers, and that while I couldn't tell our customer in advance what we needed to know, I had no doubt we would discover critical information, and I would be able to tell them after. This was no doubt annoying to the project manager and to some extent even to my colleagues, but I felt strongly enough about it to speak up and use my voice. And it worked. Eventually, they let us go, and it was great. One critical thing that we learned is that people don't really need access to everything the store sold. They typically bought the same stuff week in and week out, and anyway only used the staff to pick things that didn't really depend on judgment, like pasta or detergent. But fresh fruit, meat, all of that, they wanted to pick out themselves. So right off the bat, our brilliant scheme to compress all that data into the Palm Pilot was gone. That design, over. Another counterintuitive thing we discovered by talking to the customers was about a much debated feature of showing a running total of the orders so far in the application. Some people's intuition was that it would discourage spending because people would see how expensive their order was getting. But when we talked to our beta users, they told us, several of them told us, that they were on strict grocery budgets. And so what the total did is it enabled them to spend right up to their limit instead of guesstimating where the limit was, which actually made them spend less. And finally, we found that the huge amount of data processing that we were doing in this app in order to make recommendations to people was not a great idea, at that time at least, the way it worked. So the app was taking data from you as a loyalty customer, finding your cohort, people who spend like you, and then recommending things that your cohort bought but that you had never bought. So as we asked, again, our beta users to go through the list of 10 recommended items and ask them to tell us, would you ever buy this, we were kind of amazed at the variety of reasons we heard why they would not buy things. So they would say things like, no, my kids are allergic to that detergent. One person told us, yeah, my husband brings home free batteries from work. And another one said, yeah, those bottles don't fit in my fridge, so I don't buy that. Long story short, when we debriefed the store executives on what we had discovered talking to their customers, they were completely astonished at what we had learned. I remember thinking to myself, they're your customers, you can talk to them too. Even people who are in the field who totally get it may lose their perspective if they're doing something else, like heads-down implementation. When should one stand and fight? We built a specialized application for K-12 schools in the mid-1990s to manage email and internet access. And in that app, we enabled people to create nicknames for frequently visited sites like FTP or Gopher, which is a precursor to the web. Web browsers were in their infancy. Our main programmer was an HCI researcher, so he totally got this. I was writing the help system. It came to my attention that he allowed nicknames to be used everywhere except in this one dialog box, which I think was for searching for websites. We came to call it Custer's last dialog box because we could not agree. I was pressing to allow nicknames, he was not. And this kind of went on for a long time, like a couple of weeks at least. And then he finally told me that the reason he didn't want to put nicknames in this field was that it could have multiple hits as opposed to other cases where it would just be one thing that they had named. And either it would be confusing to people, or horror, he would have to write some more code. So after weeks, literally, of this running debate, he finally admitted this was a good idea, and he implemented the use of nicknames in the final dialog box, which eased my burden in writing the help system. So even when somebody really does get it, there might be a time when they don't really have the wherewithal to make these decisions. I really think it was his implementation focus that impaired his ability to assess design choices. And it's uncomfortable to have a disagreement like that with a friend or a colleague, especially one that kind of goes on. But later, after we resolved it and he liked the solution, we wrote about the advantages of living with design questions rather than trying to force a resolution quickly. And so remember that with your more techie colleagues. And of course, it's always helpful to know enough about the technology you're working with so that you can't be given the runaround. Implement that? Impossible. Finally, I want to mention one other thing that I ran into occasionally, though I would hope this is even more rare for you. On a phone call with the team that was going to productize our K-12 software, we were there to hear feedback from usability testing the team had done. The team lead, a guy, was making a recommendation we didn't like, to change the name of our web browser. Well, he said, the girls who ran our usability tests thought it would be a good idea. Now, I will admit that this is a generational thing, but my generation obsessed about the language we use, and calling women in a professional setting girls was definitely a no-no. So what's a feminist to do? It's a dilemma. Do you let it slide and therefore live in a world where you and your colleagues are girls? Or do you interrupt the meeting to call attention to something that is completely beside the point, but which you feel is demeaning, and which, after all, was against IBM's policy of creating a workplace free of discrimination or intimidation of any kind? Well, I think you know where this is going, and what I chose to do, which was to use my voice. So yes, I interrupted the male speaker, and I said, "Huh? You hired children to run our usability test?" To which he said, "What?" And I said, "Didn't you just say that the girls who ran our usability test?" And he said, "Well, what should I say?" And so I woman-splained to him that it was not acceptable to refer to women in a professional context as girls. Okay, I didn't claim that my advice would be advice that you would necessarily want to follow. The point is, if you are made to feel uncomfortable by a professional conversation, you may be called upon to make a tough choice, whether to voice that discomfort or not. It was not the only time I found myself doing so. Finally, I want to borrow a thought from one of my absolute idols and talk about the power of imagination in HCI and design. In her commencement address to the Harvard graduates of 2008, J.K. Rowling extolled the virtues of imagination, which she described as the fount of all innovation and of our ability to empathize with people whose life experiences we have not shared. I believe that despite HCI's origin and history in scientific methods, imagination, and particularly empathy, are the heart of good HCI and good design. Imagination is what we're going to need to address some of the truly profound challenges that technology is raising for people and societies. And empathy is the guiding light that will help us in the technological community to make choices that will resonate well with people and add value to their lives and aspirations. So, graduating class, I wish you all good luck and Godspeed in your journeys. There is no doubt that the world needs HCID people, lots of HCID people, to show up, to lead, and to speak out in the public's interest. It is not only the excellent training that you have received over the last year, but who you are that makes you valuable in this work. That is the essence of this work. If you bring that to your jobs and projects over your work life, if you represent your point of view and the empathy you gain for others who will be affected by your work, that is everything, and that is enough. So to close, I would like to remind you of what Oscar Wilde once so notably said, "Be yourself because everyone else is already taken." I couldn't agree more. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kellogg. Now is the time to recognize those we have come to honor today. Chair van der Hoek, please present the candidates for the degree of Master of Human-Computer Interaction and Design.
All right, will the candidates for the degree of Master of Human-Computer Interaction and Design please rise and remain standing.
By virtue of the authority vested in me by the Regents of the University of California, I congratulate you on completing the requirements for the degree for which you have been presented.
New masters, please come forward to be recognized. Catherine Jones. Felicia Wang. Todd Milbauer. Eon Jung. Devon Singh. Nadia Shamsuddin. Jacqueline Parker. Crystal Young. Veronica Hernandez. Magna Shet. Deborah Chiang. Isha Shake. Tala Amer. Aaron Matthew Soto. Megan Matsumoto. Brennan Kalu. Charlene Fan. Megan Cody. Jonte Williams. Tim George. And Steve No.
Yeah!
All right. And Stacy Saronic. That concludes the presentation of degrees. This is where you clap.
Congratulations to you all. I hope that in the course of this program, you all made new friends, learned as much as you could from the mentors, faculty, and fellow students, and are prepared to take all this new knowledge to make a positive difference in the world. With the MHCID program, you have chosen a path that will allow you to not only do what you truly love in the user interface field, You have chosen a path that enables you to pursue your passions and dreams, a path that takes you to great future accomplishments that transform our lives, our society, and the world for the better. As alumni of the MHCID program, please remember to come back and serve as mentors for future students. Don't forget. Also, as alumni of the Donald Brent School of Information and Computer Sciences, please leverage and engage with the ICS alumni community, one of the largest alumni groups in information technology with more than 9,000 members. Once again, congratulations and best of luck in all your future endeavors. Professor Hayes, please come forward for the closing remarks.
Congratulations to you all. There are very special guests here today who also deserve well-earned recognition. They have encouraged, and in many, probably all cases, made great sacrifices so that the graduates before us could further their education. Graduates, please stand and turn to thank your parents, spouses, significant others, loved ones, grandparents, children, and all the relatives and supporters. We salute and applaud you. Please be seated. Our thanks to all of you, and again, congratulations to all the graduates. Ladies and gentlemen, the commencement ceremony will now conclude with the recessional march. May I request that the audience remain seated until the recessional is completed. Thank you for participating in today's ceremony, and please join us outside for photographs.